What advice would you give somebody aspiring to lead not just marketing, but the broader business functions that are tied to generating revenue?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just be curious. I think many people, when they join an organization, they kind of have blinders of like, okay, this is my job. This is what my considerations are. These are my objectives. These are my goals. These are my constraints, and fail to consider other departments' considerations. Like, I mean, the broader company goal will obviously hopefully be aligned, but people have different considerations based on what their job functions are. And you need to be able to do that if you have aspirations to have a broader impact on the organization.
Hi, and welcome to Growth Talks, where we dive deep into the world of growth and marketing with industry leaders. I'm Christina Rubino, the general manager of the offline practice at Right Side Up, and your host. Joining me today is Ian Young, former SVP of Revenue at Tonal, who has also held a variety of leadership roles at other venture-backed startups like Parachute and Touch of Modern. Ian's career spans multiple industries with deep expertise in consumer growth marketing and leadership across marketing, operations, finance, and beyond. In this episode, we're going to dive into the world of long purchase cycles, the unique dynamics of startups, and the art of balancing aggressive growth with financial discipline. So thank you, Ian, for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've had a pretty dynamic career journey that spans growth marketing to revenue leadership. What advice would you give somebody aspiring to lead not just marketing, but the broader business functions that are tied to generating revenue?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just be curious. I think many people, when they join an organization, they kind of have blinders of like, okay, this is my job. This is what my considerations are. These are my objectives. These are my goals. These are my constraints, and fail to consider other departments' considerations. Like, I mean, the broader company goal will obviously hopefully be aligned, but people have different considerations based on what their job functions are. And you need to be able to do that if you have aspirations to have a broader impact on the organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's always the question of like straddling growth marketing and revenue and ensuring that your teams stay focused on profitability and margin. How do you ensure that focus is maintained? Like particularly in industry or stages where I hope and think that we've learned this lesson as an industry at this point, but like, where growth is often prioritized over sustainability, how do you ensure teams are focusing on not necessarily growth at all costs, but margin positive growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's creating sort of guardrails to different metrics. So every growth marketer should have a set of KPIs that they're looking at and optimizing towards. And those need to have certain guardrails and counterbalancing metrics, right? So there's efficiency metrics and there's effectiveness metrics. So revenue can just be effective and just up and to the right. But if you don't have the efficiency to pair with that effectiveness, you're going to get yourself into trouble. And just be really transparent with the team that, hey, these are the guardrails for a reason. It's not just because someone is trying to be hard about it. It really is because this level of efficiency is predicated on the margin structure of the business or the capital structure of the business or the payback periods, all those kind of things. And just kind of like explain to them how those guardrails and targets were derived. Hopefully they're fair and attainable and maybe a little stretch, but like there's obviously some thought that goes into creating those targets and then like widely disseminating and holding people accountable to achieving them.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's a very, very practical way of looking at it, which knowing that you have a background as a manufacturing engineer, I'm like, that totally makes sense to me.
And I think it's also served me well just in sort of dealing with sort of other functions like with finance, operations. Like financial constraints are not the only constraints in at least the businesses I've been in, but like inventory is a massive constraint, especially for long lead time and complex supply chains. And so having that same just like frankness and like just sort of telling the whole story and having empathy for their constraints has helped me in sort of getting growth on the right track, but also being sustainable, not just from a financial perspective, but just being able to deliver and not have any brand damaging delays in shipments and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I know. It's like that old joke about like, if the supply chain breaks or if you crash a website, both of which are things that I've done in my career. At that point, it's like, as marketing, you're like, haha, deal with it. And then when you have cross-functional experience, I'm sure that a party was like, shit, like now somebody has to deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, even to the point of like, there's like so many second and third order problems. So like if you crush it, right? Like you go into Black Friday, you forecast the level of sales, and all of a sudden you're like 2x it. Awesome. Yay. We 2x. You don't have enough inventory and you're not going to be able to deliver in time. Well, okay. Well, obviously shipments are going to be delayed. There's going to be a ton of angry or not so happy customers that are going to be calling to customer support. If customer support's not staffed, hey, guess what? We're jumping on. It's all hands on deck. And I have so much empathy for customer support, having worked through a BFCM dealing with some variation of email of you ruined my Christmas. My so-and-so is not getting their present because you're horrible. And it's always challenging if you don't have that broader holistic view on the drivers of the business and what's necessary to actually deliver the product.
This is that moment where it's like, you can hear all about working cross-functionally, and everybody's always like, it's really important. And it's like, well, it's really important because if you do it the wrong way, you're going to piss a lot of your customers off. Yeah. And even just like thinking about like the whole like victim of your own success thing, or to put it differently, there were so many businesses, especially during COVID, obviously that struggled, but there were also a lot of businesses that were just straight up winners, right? That dealt with a level of not seasonality, I don't know what we call it, demand, that
unnatural headwinds or tailwinds.
Unnatural tailwinds. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Tonal was definitely a beneficiary of that.
I mean, I was thinking about Tonal because like the other part of it is there's a really interesting financial turnaround story there where it's like, it's a scaled, but still unprofitable venture at one point to getting to break even and beyond. And I think that was like during the first 6 months of your tenure. And you started at Tonal post the big boom of COVID. So like how, I mean, I know that it was you and your team, but what were some of the most critical levers that you and your team pulled to make that happen when you were riding maybe the very last bits of that tailwind?
Oh no, that tailwind was fully like inverted into a headwind. So for context, I joined in July of 2020. And so 2020, COVID, massive booms, right? Vaccines in 2021, late 2021, early 2022. People got their shots. People were out and not really having to be stuck at home. And that's where the tailwinds kind of dissipated and people were not wanting to be at home. And so by the time I joined, it was clear that a course correction was necessary. We could not afford to keep on going in that direction, especially with capital markets drying up. And so that was just, I guess, the context of when I joined. There's a couple things that were necessary. And it's not just obviously me or my team, but the broader company had to go through this transition. And there were sort of a couple, I'll call it 3 main pillars to what we needed to do. So one is just reorg and just become a leaner organization that's more suited for where the business was rather than where the aspirations of the business was going to. So the business was orged to be sort of the Nike of strength training, aspirations of like just dominating, like serving the entire US population and globally. And so there were many layers, a lot of really talented and super experienced operators of like global multinational businesses, public company businesses. But that's not where Tonal was realistically going to be for the next foreseeable future, right? And so we had to reorg, reduce layers, prioritize generalists rather than specialists, and really focus resources where we believed there was leverage for the organization to grow, right? So we had prior dedicated resources and team staff to sell into hospitality, to sell into healthcare. We did sell into those places, but the business couldn't afford to have a dedicated seller of those verticals. And so we had to streamline that. And that was just a painful reorg. Like there was some layoffs and all that. So that was a big part of the early tenure. The second piece is just being much more efficient with our media buys and our capital. We had CACs that were in the thousands, and then we had to dramatically reduce that by 3 or 4x. And that was a couple things. So one is the company prior was very focused on MTAs. So that's just, we had really long consideration cycles. And so like, oh, if our ad touched someone, we're like, oh, that channel is working. Unfortunately, that led to really spamming our most likely to convert customers, which were going to convert anyway. They were so low in the funnel, but we were just spamming them with media. I remember as soon as I joined, I went to the website, did all the things, and then I was getting like ad after ad after ad. Like I think I counted 16 ads for Tonal consecutively in my feed. And I was like, okay, there's something clearly broken here. Focused on incrementality, leaned into to just like really understand where there was causal impacts to like people buying a Tonal, right?
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of preaching to the choir that was happening prior, and then also just not getting in front of people that would consider the Tonal. And so that was just a huge shift in our media and dramatic step function reduction in our CACs. And then sort of lastly is the working and creating a predictable engine with cross-functional partners, right? So because Tonal was a scaled organization, there's a lot of complexity, right? It's not just like, oh, you acquire customers, you don't acquire customers, and then end of story. You need to have the inventory, you need to have the operations. And there was a lack of transparency and like sort of communication between finance operations and growth marketing, whatever, go to market, which led to some really distorted sort of inventory positions, investment decisions. And I was able to work really well with our CFO and our ops organization to create an S&OP process where we had some pretty good predictability in terms of where demand was going and where our opportunities are to inflect or reduce that based on the trade-offs that we had. And we had a lot of trade-offs because capital was constrained, right? Like it was no longer the world of growth at all costs. We can raise $100 million like that. And so we had to be really, really mindful of our cash position. And we had debt, so there's EBITDA covenants and all those kind of things. So those are all things that we had to balance to sort of maximize growth and revenue while working under the constraints of both financial and operational constraints.
It's a testament to the product and the team around it that made it happen, because there are a lot of boom and bust stories that came out of that absolutely unexpected demand that COVID caused for some businesses. And the stories are not as like, oh, okay, no, like we made it happen. So it's definitely a testament to you and the team. One thing that you touched on that's really interesting is that I think a lot of marketers tend to use MTA and as almost like interchangeable terms. They are not. I don't want to say they couldn't be more different, because like at the core of it, it's about understanding the effectiveness of media channels. But like when you just painted that picture of like, okay, well, if we see an exposure in MTA, you know, like if we're seeing like attribution, like the snowball that rolls down the hill picks up steam real fast when it comes to MTA. So like I saw you nodding as I was saying, like MTA and MMM are not the same thing. I mean, how do you think about the differences between them?
Yeah.
And how are you like, no, I actually, like your instinct wasn't to like immediately be like last click only, we're never looking at anything else. Like obviously it's not as a bad thing, but what was your instinct to be like, no, we need to be the one that drives the bus?
So there's a couple, like, I mean, I guess my instinct is I don't think of any of those tools as like sources of truth. Like in the growth space, obviously it's like, what's your source of truth? What's your, right? And I think that's a very simplistic way to talk about it. It's like, yes. What tools do you use to build a house? Like, well, you have your hammer, you have your screwdriver, you have your saw. You can't build a house with just a hammer. Like you're going to try and hammer a screw, it's going to be inefficient. Yeah. You need to cut something, the hammer's going to take a long time, right? And so like every tool has value, right? It's used in certain circumstances, in certain context. The trick is knowing which context to use which tool and then piece it together so that you have a complete and stable house. The house of measurement has considerations for different businesses. So for a product like Tonal, long consideration cycle, infrequent purchase, and there's obviously other complexities where certain tools like incrementality testing may not be as effective as something where you just have to just wait longer, right? And that's where it is better for that type of business. Now, for a business like Parachute, much shorter consideration cycle, still considered like higher than average AOV. Incrementality testing was the best tool for that business.
Yeah.
Other businesses, MTAs can be useful, but always needs to be caveated with some other data point to sort of triangulate and make sure that you're not falling into some of the traps that MTAs are so easy to fall into.
Yeah, I agree with you completely about no one source of truth. I say all the time, like everything is, it's varying degrees of wrong. It's just what is the least wrong thing and what data can you find across the board that's like not fitting your narrative, because that's a whole other danger, right? But like, is there anything that you're like, okay, these things are generally all talking about the same thing. This other one's off here in the very, very far distance. So like, what's going on there? Is that the right thing? Or is it more often than not, it's like, if you can't corroborate the results from an MTA with first party data, guess what? Like, it's not that accurate, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's also a tendency in our industry to try and seek channel or tools that give false precision. So MTAs and like, right, like it's like, oh, you have exactly whatever to the 10th decimal point of ROAS. And it like, that's BS, right? Like there's no way that you can have that level of precision from like a true, like metaphorical, like truth. And all the tool needs to tell you is, should you spend more or less into whatever you're doing, right? Like that's ultimately the decision.
That's all I need from you. Yeah.
That's all I need is like, yes, no. And at what level, right? So anyway, that's, I'll get off my soapbox. Like people in the industry spend too much time trying to gild the lily in measurement.
I mean, perfect is the enemy of good, right? Like really. And we all like I try not to use platitudes because marketers we love an acronym. We love a platitude. But it's like there are things like the cheap, fast, and good triangle I come back to all the time because guess what? I have yet to see it be wrong. Perfect is the enemy of good. Good enough is good enough sometimes. Not in terms of like work product. Like we're not sitting here and trying to like good enough. But like if you can get to good enough with your measurement strategy and then you can back it up with first party data, you are probably in a better position than like 8 out of 10 of the brands out there, which is depressing.
No, and there's also just over complexity when you need to communicate said insights to a broader audience, right? Like to finance.
CFO? Yeah.
To CFO. Like
same brain.
If you need to have like a 50-page deck and all the things and like they're not going to grok what you're trying to say. And it's going to hinder your ability to partner with said function, right? I remember having one of my first one-on-ones with the CFO at the time. And she said, yeah, I don't know what your predecessor, like what they did or like how they, they say all this stuff and I just didn't understand it. And I was like, huh, okay. Well, that is, and it wasn't a testament because like that individual wasn't like, she was smart and like she knew her stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It was just overly complicated, right? And didn't actually, it went around like 50 times in circles and didn't get anywhere. It didn't actually tell the story of what needed to be said.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean. I also I prefer when we all just kind of talk in general terms, meaning like, it shouldn't be so like, we're not splitting an atom. We're not sending a dude to the moon. Like you should be able to explain what you're doing day in and day out to grow a business because there's only so many ways you can do it, right? Like something that really is fascinating to me, especially because a lot of the work that I do now is in a channel with delayed consumption. And so when I match that up with a brand always that has like a long consideration cycle, I'm like, you guys, we're going to be waiting for a minute to look at results and we need to be patient here. And so like just thinking about Tonal in particular, in general, with these products with long consideration cycles, what are some of the strategies you found to address these challenges specifically? And then you have a host of other D2C experience that may have a slightly longer cycle, like you said, with Parachute. Like, it's not like everybody's out here just being like, oh, I'll just buy another set of sheets tomorrow, right? But like what can other companies who may not have the same long purchase consideration cycle, right, learn from other industries with these like long customer journeys and these higher price points?
Yeah. So I took a lot of inspiration from B2B and B2B SaaS, actually. That was, there's so many parallels to what Tonal was doing. So B2B, multi-stakeholders. You have your CIO who's going to be investing in whatever software platform. You have the users, you have the CEO, CFO that needs to like make an authorized big ACV contracts. Every one of them have different considerations.
Yeah.
In Tonal, most of our customers were married. And so there's like two partners that also have different perspectives in terms of, are they going to be using it, or are they controlling the budgeting for that household to make that investment? Tonal needs to be installed. So like it's a decorating decision as well in terms of where to put it, right? So all those things have sort of impacts to the purchase journey. Lead generation and collecting, like almost account-based management type tactics, where depending on who is doing the research on the product from a fitness perspective, they're probably going to be the user of the product. Who's checking out the installation and financing page and all that, like probably the controlling the purse strings, if you will.
Yeah.
And not to generalize, but for most of our customers, it was the guy was going to be the user. They're super like want to buy the thing. At least in my household, my wife controls purchasing decision. And so like, she's like, do I have budget authorization or not to pull the trigger? And, but like, those are the two things where based on the interactions with our website, there's certain like purchase triggers that we know when to sort of send different messaging to those customers. A step above that was, what are the consideration triggers that signal, right? And so in the B2B space, there's a lot of sort of intent signals that are out there, that there's some vendors that are aggregating that, but that show when is a business ready to consider your product, right? If you just raised a fundraising round, that's probably a signal that you're going to be making investments in your infrastructure, right? Like that's a consideration signal. For Tonal, the consideration signal was moving into a new home, redecorating your home was a consideration signal that I'm going to make an investment to build out a home gym, right? So that was the consideration signal for business, which then the trick is, how do you find the triggers that are indicative and proxies for that? And then sort of a step above that is sort of like seasonal moments. And in the fitness space, January, new year, new you, like New Year's resolutions are always a often made, frequently kept promise that has seasonal moments. And we already talked about sort of COVID, that unfortunately was never able to see that again. But yeah, that's how I sort of thought about different industries and how I fit together.
Yeah. And it makes sense, because it's like, it's so easy to talk about like the long purchase consideration cycle. It sounds like monolithic. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there's emotional challenges for the buyer. There's practical challenges. Like my husband always wanted a dedicated space in our house for a gym. But prior to this, we were living in the Bay Area in a condo the size of a postage stamp. And if you think that I was putting any gym equipment in our living room, like, I love that man dearly, but you know, I think me and your wife can talk, you know, just it is very funny how like these things occasionally do either break on gender lines, or you're like, oh no, this is a business decision that there needs to be consensus in the household or we will have disarray. Like practical challenges, like, do you have the budget for it at this point? Like to your point about when you're in a move, all of a sudden you're like, what do I want this next thing to be and look like?
Yeah. And from a practical consideration, price point is frequently like talked of as like, oh, if it's expensive, it's high consideration. Absolutely not true, right? Like absolutely not true. When I worked at Touch of Modern, one of the biggest business lines was luxury watches. Like there are customers, and a lot of our customers, that made $10,000 watch purchases on a whim. Like literally less than a minute of consideration. Oh, that's cool. And we know because here's the email. They saw it for the first time, less than 10 minutes later, in cart and like happy as a clam multiple times, right? So your willingness to spend is a personal value, means, and like how you choose to spend your disposable income. And it's not always true, especially in the high net worth sort of category of luxury products. There's, I would sort of, if I would take a step back, like the way I think about consideration is, do I want it? Like, am I convinced that this is a thing that I want?
Yeah.
That's usually the first kind of like where most people talk about like marketing to someone, is convincing someone that this thing is better than the alternatives and they need this to solve a problem or pain point or a desire in their lives. For Tonal, I'd say that's pretty typical 30 to 60 day consideration cycle. People are pretty not, it doesn't take that long for people to get bought into Tonal as the best workout solution for me.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is okay, I've now decided that I want this. When am I going to make this decision, and how am I going to make this like tactical thing, right? Like it needs to be installed. It needs to not just be installed, but like professionally installed with like 8 lag bolts into studs. And it's a general contractor, like home renovation type level of thing. It's not just putting it. And so that goes into the dual stakeholder thing. But even if you have buy-in, we've had customers that just couldn't install because their walls are made of brick, which is too crumbly. It doesn't have the resistance. Their studs are too far apart. There's like space considerations. Mm-hmm. And so that further delays the ability for people to sort of pull the trigger. When you take these outliers and like mix them in with people that don't have that ends up extending on average the consideration time, when it's not really consideration. It's not the right time for them to pull the trigger because they need to do a stud build out, or they're waiting on this furniture delivery that's going to redecorate and turn a nursery into a gym, right? Mm-hmm. And those are completely out of our control. And so we had to be comfortable with just knowing that there's going to be this long tail, can't control what you can't control, and just focus on what you can control, which is the shorter, more happy path customer that has the space and doesn't have all these like installation headaches. You can impact that.
Yeah. It's purchasing decisions don't always follow predictable patterns. Even in the most like whim, like I used to work on chapstick a long, long time ago. And I just remember looking around and being like, guys, why are we going to drive to a website for chapstick? Like it's freaking chapstick. Like you're going to buy it or you're not going to buy it. But there's that moment of like, well, if you are going to buy it, you've been exposed to an ad at some point. So then actually it does get back to MTA, right? And maybe there's different tools and ways and thoughts of how to capture the consumer's attention so that when it does come time to make the decision, whether it's a snap purchase of a $1.29 item, or you're like, hey, actually, you're ready now. Like, buying a new car. Actually, auto advertising is fascinating to me. It's a fascinating challenge for marketers to overcome. How do you create marketing strategies that are like, that ensure you capture demand at the right time and that when people are ready, you're the person, you're the brand they think of?
Yes, no, absolutely. You brought up automotive. I had some past life experience in automotive manufacturing, but other industries, insurance, credit cards, right? Like if you think about all the traditional TV advertisements, cars, credit cards, and insurance, right? Like, and it's a reason why they're all kind of together and playing in the same space, and it's infrequent, right? You don't often think to buy a car or change your insurance carrier or cell phone plans, right? So the frequency it's infrequent. To my earlier point, you can't predict when someone's going to be in market to trigger that, right? Like it's just basically random noise. People across the country are going to be either ready to make that purchase or not. So you kind of have to have this always on drumbeat of brand exposure to maintain a level of like awareness and top of mind to just to be even considered, right? And then the strategy is how do you stand out, right? Like people have very, very short attention spans and memories. And so even if you are out there, if you can't stand out in a way that like people remember of why I should even care, it's going to be noise. It's in one out the other. And unfortunately, that happens with too many car brands, right? Like there are some car brands that stand out for different attributes. But for the most part, it's like, oh, we're safe. Oh, we're comfortable. Oh, we have high performance. It's like, well, all of you say the same thing, right? And then some brands insurance companies lean with like humor and like jingles and like that way to stay top of mind. But
yeah,
I mean, that's a different playbook.
Yeah, I call myself a recovering brand advertiser sometimes because it's not that style of advertising doesn't work. It's that some of these companies have been around and investing in some of these channels since before many marketers now were even born. And so they have data. Like if you look at Procter and Gamble and the amount of marketing investment that they invest every year to drive preference for their brands, well, like preference for some of their brands like harkens back to the 40s and 50s. It's just a different length of marketing journey, frankly. And it's like they're driving generational preference. And so when you're trying to like contextualize a decision on whether or not to invest in TV or audio or to scale digital or to do whatever, it's like no matter for most startups how long the company's been in business, like you don't hold a candle to Macy's, which has been around since RH Macy's and Company and is still one of the top 5 radio advertisers in the country, depending on the time of year. So it's kind of an interesting like
I mean, I've talked about sort of the false dichotomy of brand and performance and like growth marketing. It's just time scale. The only difference is time scale.
That's
right. Like you're all advertisers, all marketing wants you to buy something. It's just a matter of like, how long are you going to actually like see the results of that? Right. Are you investing in the short term or are you investing in the long term?
Yeah.
And to say that brand marketers are not data driven is completely false, right? Like good ones are incredibly analytical and data driven. And to say that growth marketers are like robots and don't have human emotion, like, well, that's how you get high performing ads is through creative, right? And so anyway, it's just silly when people label or add labels to sort of tactics or things as, oh, this is a whatever hacker. And I know that's a question coming up later, but
yeah, I'm with you. It's like, yeah. And the payback window is long. And like I said, generational. Like my parents refuse to use any detergent other than Tide. If you ask them to name another brand of detergent, I actually don't think they could. What's in my closet right now? Freaking Tide. So like, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I now like the smell, even like the scent of it. I'm like, oh no, that's like my clothes are clean. There's all of these other really interesting psychological points about marketing that are like, I think I'm with you about the false dichotomy of brand versus growth. I totally think it's a construct. I mean, humans love a construct, right? But the most successful companies that I've seen are the ones that it's like, to your point, you're focusing on metrics. You're focusing on different metrics. That's it. Like most brand marketers can tell you what their aided and unaided household awareness is. They can tell you how long their cycle is for purchase consideration. They can tell you their top retailers. They can tell you the growth in those retailers quarter over quarter. It's not that it's not data. It's that it's not, the up to the minute, up to the hour, whatever you're looking at on AdWords or Meta. And it's not to say one or the other is wrong, but.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also goes back to the whole false precision thing, right? It's like bad brand marketers will talk about like awareness and just have measurement error or just have some methodological thing that just inflates awareness in a way that doesn't actually correlate with purchases or impact the business. It's the same way that bad growth marketers will lean on MTA and talk about attribution that just doesn't correlate to success of the business.
Yeah.
Both of those metrics can be helpful to sort of show where a business is headed, but the execution is so important. And the devil's in the details, right? It's always love those platitudes.
Yeah, I know, but like sometimes you're just like, but it's so true. It really is. Like, yeah, I'm a detail oriented nuisance. Let's get into, okay, so we do an A/B test. It's a little silly. This is the most unpsyched, hopefully It's the most unscientific test that most marketers who come on the show will ever run in their career. So when we've all been there. So I'm just going to ask you one or the other. Pick, embellish or don't embellish. The choice is yours. I'll get into one that's work related first. Acquisition or retention?
Okay, I'm just going to preface everything that you say is going to have a depends on it, and I always like it's. I know it's awful.
Bro, you get one. You'll have one. You get one depends.
Am I going to use this depends now? Because this one really does depend. All right, I have to say it depends because it just depends on the business, right? Like, is there a repeat purchase like thing going on? Is there a risk of churn, right? Like, so with Tonal, it's acquisition all the way. Why? It's a one-time purchase for most part. The product is incredibly sticky. Like, marketing doesn't have to do much. The product does it for yourself, and churn is incredibly low. Like, there's just less ability to like inflect anything. Like, most people are going to be continuing to pay and use the product because it's so awesome. So for that business, acquisition. But then other businesses where like e-commerce businesses, like you need that retention repeat business to justify LTVs and acquisition costs.
Right.
And the more you can inflect LTV, the more you can afford to pay for acquisition. Right. And so
I'll give you an easier one now. Okay. So for funsies, one long vacation a year or lots of short trips?
One long one. I think that, at least for me, it takes a little bit to sort of get into the mode of like, okay, I'm good.
I'm off. Yeah.
And jet lag sucks. And so I would much rather go somewhere and like be able to spend time, immerse, not be rushed, and fully experience that rather than just spending so much time actually like moving from place to place and adapting and like doing all that.
Yeah, makes sense. Partnering with retail giants or staying fully D2C?
I will go with partnering, but mindfully. I think fully D2C, you're leaving money on the table. Like, there's only so much that you can do just by yourself. And so partnering is always beneficial. You just have to be mindful of how to do it.
Yeah, that tracks. Brand strategy or performance marketing?
So as this almost pains me to say it, but brand strategy first. And you need something that can be inspirational for a broad organization. Performance marketing is not inspirational to anybody except for performance marketers. It just,
and CFOs occasionally, right? But most of the time not.
It doesn't give you a why, right? And humans need a why.
Yeah. Reading a book or listening to a podcast?
Listening to a podcast. I am just able to engage with that form of media in more hours of the day than I am to sit down and read something.
Yeah, I hear you. Subscription model or one-time purchase?
Subscription model. Public markets value subscriptions so much better. It's such a better business model if you can have the product that can, like, the product market fit to afford that. But yeah, if you can do it and you have the product, absolutely.
Yeah. Cooking at home or eating dinner out?
I aspire to cook at home more for health reasons. I am sort of gluttonous when I go out, and it's not great for my health. So I'm sort of spending more time trying to get better in the kitchen.
Oh, I love that. I'm like I want to have different tastes, especially if you go out to a restaurant and you're like, I want to try this and I want to try that. And then all of a sudden you're like, somebody roll me out of here. Like, yeah, I hear you. Okay. Last one, breakfast for dinner or leftovers for breakfast?
Leftovers for breakfast.
Ooh, like a cold pizza guy?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely. Breakfast foods, I'm not a fan of, actually, just in general. Like, I mean, eggs, I'm like, yeah, they're good as an ingredient, but like by themselves,
That's fair.
I'm not a fan of pancakes or waffles. It's too much. Too sweet.
I mean, all right, fine. Well,
no judgment.
We were bound to disagree about something.
Space. This was supposed to be a safe space.
I'm so sorry. I should have given you a trigger warning. It's definitely a safe space. We were bound to disagree about something sooner or later. So I'm glad that it's waffles. it is definitely dessert for breakfast. Like I fully recognize that. I'm okay with it. Okay. We'll get back into like work now. I love that I just like work. And if if you're listening to this, I air quoted work, which is, Oh, okay. So you've got a variety of experience now across like very early stage startups and scaled companies. Even if they still have startup mentality and they're, pre-acquisition, et cetera, there's a difference. What's the biggest misconception about the levers of success at each stage? Like, how do you help teams focus on real growth drivers instead of external perceptions like fundraising or valuations?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think depending on where you are in the life cycle of a company's maturity, there's different things that are going to get you to the next level, right? And so early stage, it's product market fit. Like you should not even have a growth marketer if you're super early. If you don't have product market fit, like it doesn't matter. You can have the best growth person, marketing person, you're not going to have long-term success.
You can't make fetch happen.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And then the other like corollary to that is if you have product market fit, it's so obvious. You don't have to do anything, right? It's like your ideal customer profile will find it. They will love it. They will talk about it. It will grow by itself, right? And so product market fit all the way. Okay. Now you're a little more mature. You've got your product market fit. You're like, what's your next stage? Channel market fit. There's going to be one or two channels that are going to like, there's a power rule. Pareto, absolutely. Like, don't bother trying to like diversify or find all the channels. Don't do a channel because so-and-so, or you heard it on a podcast or whatever, right? There's clear winners in terms of how you spread the message because it's where your audience is. It's because how they consume the media. It's whatever, right? There's always going to be a channel that is going to have outsized impact to the growth of your business. Find that as quickly as possible and like double down and ride that winner all the way. At scaled companies, it's less about finding those winners and it's finding a predictable engine to sort of manage all this complexity, right? Like once you get to a certain level of scale, you have operational considerations, you have financial considerations, you have just the team is just much larger. And so coordinating that requires a level of predictability because it's not effective to just have fire drills all the time and like, oh, this thing happened. And then we're all like running around. Like it can be managed when you're like a 20, 30, 40, 50 person team. When you're 100, 200, 500, like fire drills are just horrible. And so having and investing time in creating sort of a demand forecasting process that like communicates that and having some predictability in terms of if I pull on lever X by this much, this is the output of what that's going to happen. And obviously you still want to grow as quickly as possible, but usually by the time you've reached that level of scale, all the low-hanging fruit has already sort of like been pulled on, right? Like product market fit, your ideal customers already know it. Channel market fit, you've saturated that channel, or you should have saturated that channel by that stage, right? So it's layering on the additional ones. And it's less about just throwing spaghetti in the wall, but more about, okay, if I do this, it's not going to be as effective as the stuff that you're already doing, typically, but it should still have some measurable impact that the business can count on for you to make investment decisions, for you to make resource allocation decisions and communicate and manage expectations to investors and stakeholders.
Yeah. And actually like there's investor pressure is real. It is. Especially, venture backs. It's a good thing, but I mean, founders and executives often face intense pressure to perform for investors. Like there is though this balance between investor expectations and building a long-term profitable business. So what advice do you have for people that are kind of like straddling that?
I mean, it's managing expectations, right? Like having expectations is a good thing. You want to have ambition. You want to have goals. Like you can't just be like, right? Like we do live in a capitalist society where there needs to be like a return on capital at rates higher than the next alternative. So I guess not that it's a trick, but the advice I'd give is just being able to communicate what's happening, right? Like this is the context that the business was in. This is the levers that are available, and these are constraints. This is the plan that we're going to do, or we're going to take. These are the set of actions that we're going to as a company, as an executive team, as whatever. These are the things that we're going to do. That is the best way we can play this hand, right? Like we're dealt the hand of cards, and this is how we're going to play that hand. And based on how we play it, our expectation is that we're going to do X, right? And just make sure that investors are aligned with that. Get feedback from them, especially with VC and these sort of more known, renowned investment firms. They have a lot of resources. They have more visibility into things that are happening outside of the company that you should absolutely lean into so that you can get broader exposure to what's going on in the market. Get their feedback. Hey, I think this is going to happen. What do you see in the public markets or in other industries or in the other companies that they're sort of doing diligence on, and see if it jives. And then hopefully everyone kind of like holds hands and kumbayas around this is the plan of action, and then go and execute and then see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, and I only have one more question for you, but now you've got me like kind of down another rabbit hole, which is just like multiples in public markets are at historic lows. So when you look at how that might wind up shaping the future of VC-backed businesses, there's a subset of companies that are venture-backed that have historically relied on fundraising over profitability. What are the implications in the marketplace for those kinds of companies?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably other more qualified financial professionals that can speak on that. But like, I mean, my take is it's kind of the obvious ones, right? A lot of those companies are not going to be standalone independent companies, right? Like they're going to be acquired, they're going to go under, they're whatever, right? Just either you can turn it around and you can make the business, like remove existential risk from the business as an independent company. You have to have enough cash flow to fund your operations. You have to have enough profitability, blah, blah, blah. The downside is going to be the sort of mark to market for investments, right? Like I know a lot of investors had investment thesis that just, especially for the multiples they paid, are just not going to happen, right? Like it's just unlikely to happen, but they're holding on and they're holding out hope. And maybe in like 5-10 years, like things will catch up, but like, and investors are unwilling to admit that they were wrong. And so they hold on and they continue to put pressure and they bring on new management teams. And it's just kind of this kick the can down the road until eventually something happens. Either they take the down round or they sell for, take a hit on the returns, or they die trying. The company, right? Not anyone's actually dying.
No. And we were kind of talking about this before we even hit record, but we were like, we work in businesses where there's consequential decisions and all of that, but like to the point about dying trying, like nobody's, little perspective. But well, my final question is the same as it always is, but we hear the term in our industry growth hack all of the time. What I want to know is, what is your favorite growth non-hack?
Yeah, I call it seeking truth. So when I think about growth hacking, and especially in our industry, people just want the shortcut. People want this worked. And I saw someone on LinkedIn post something about like, oh, let me tell you about the numbers I used to win the lottery, right? It's like, that's not actually helpful. And growth hacks typically follow that same kind of structure of like, it worked for that person, individual context, which is great, good for you. If you just take that and just try and like copy it, like that's probably not going to work. It's more important to actually understand why something worked or didn't, and use that insight and knowledge to direct where you go with what you want to do. And testing is another kind of like, oh, like I test all the time. Like I run A/B tests. And it's like, well, do you actually run like the way it's intended, which is the scientific method of like have a hypothesis and validate it or invalidate it and iterate based on what you learn? Or are you just throwing spaghetti against the wall and just like picking the one that has the higher number? And like, if the industry would actually go back to the tools and use them the way they were intended, rather than trying to find a shortcut, I think the industry would be much better off.
I couldn't agree more. And I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but thank you for all your time. I'll end us here. Really appreciate all the insights and appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Growth Talks. We hope you found our discussion insightful and fun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more valuable content. And if you're excited and ready to start up-leveling your growth strategies and execution, Right Side Up has you covered. Right Side Up is a leading growth marketing agency that has partnered with over 1,000 companies of all stages and sizes to help them meet and exceed their growth goals. With expertise across all growth marketing functions, we can help you evaluate product market fit, develop customer acquisition strategies, navigate executional challenges and staffing gaps, and make pivotal decisions with confidence. And whether you need one individual or a custom-built, full-service team, we'll find you the right A+ talent. Visit us at rightsideup.com to see how we can help you and your company grow.